Today we do have a speaker. It was going to be me first, that's fine. Beth is away. So Chris is going to come and she's got a couple of things she wants to talk about. And I have told her it's an early start, so hopefully she'll be here earlier than normal. But until then it's going to be me. Then we'll have our break. And then Felix, who we all call Bongo, that's what he wants to be called. Felix Bongamin is someone who's been here for 2 or 3 years from Uganda. And he's done a lot of work in promoting the aims of GAFI, which is promoting awareness and whatever in Africa. And they ran a big meeting a few months ago that was very successful, and they've come up with whole new guidelines of things for the whole world, actually, on what diagnostics should be available in every country. So he's leaving in the end of next week, to go back to Uganda. So I've got him to come and give us a talk about whatever he wants to talk about, essentially, about his time here. He started off as a student here on our MSc course 2 or 3 years ago, and he seems to have stayed. It kind of happens to some of our students that Professor Dunning sort of won't let them go. But they have to be good to get that accolade. So and Bongo's very good. So I did actually take him to see a couple of football matches while he was here.
Which team?
He had been really bad, so I had to took him to see Everton twice.
All right.
First time they got beat 5-1 by Arsenal. So he was very amused. And he's going to talk about his work with us and with GAFI. And hopefully he'll tell you a bit about GAFI if you're probably not fully aware of what GAFI is all about. We have some members of staff here. We've got 2 students over there, which is Megan and Emma, who are here for the next year. What are you here to do?
We're sort of helping out in the lab and also with grant with us. We're just doing a placement year, and then we're going to go back and do final year.
So you're in the middle of your degree on, what was it, biomedical sciences? Or?
I'm doing biology of science and society.
I'm doing biochemistry.
You know which one's the harder of those two, sorry. Okay, so they're just sitting in, and, oh no, that's right. Other than that, we're all patients and carers. Okay, so on with my first talk. Yep. So, this is the paper that actually came out yesterday, and I thought I have to tell you about this because it follows on from a story we did a couple of years ago, where we're developing the technology to actually grow our own lungs using stem cells, which sounds very science fiction, but even 2 to 3 years ago, we were starting to be able to do it. Finding these stem cells had been a big problem, but we were starting to be able to do it. Okay, but if just 2 to 3 years ago, that was fairly early days. Now things, according to this paper, have moved on quite a bit. So I shall introduce the subject a little bit better. Stem cells is that where our entire body is made up of cells, billions and billions of cells. Very, very few of them are called stem cells. If you think about it, we all originally came from one cell, which was the fertilized egg, our mother's fertilized egg. So that one cell had the potential to form all of these massive amounts of cells that we're made up of. And there are thousands of different types. They're very specialized. So theoretically, that all of those came from one cell. Hopefully, we should be able to grow any of those from a single cell again and grow a heart, grow a liver, or grow lungs. We couldn't do that for years because we could never find the cells that were capable of doing that. If you try and do it with a skin cell, it will only form a very limited number of cells. It won't form lung cells. You can find cells even if you try to get lung cells, they will grow up a little bit and then stop. They're no good. What you need is something called a pluripotent cell, which means, or the other word for it is stem cell, which means those cells, and we didn't know that they existed, are capable of dividing into any cell in our body. So those are the ideal repair kit for our bodies, okay? They were discovered, I think it was only about 10 years ago, the first ones were actually isolated and found. When I was doing cancer research in the 80s, we were looking for these things, and no one could find them. They believe they must be there. It's a bit like doing astronomy, and you're looking for dark holes. We believe it's there, but we can't see them, we can't find them. But they did eventually find them. Just said all that. And we have been able to isolate them, and we have now been able to isolate and identify lung stem cells. Now, we knew that stem cells exist because we know you might be aware that if you damage your liver will regrow. Okay, it's the only organ that will do it, and what must be causing that is a liver stem cell, because there's no other way for it to regrow. It may not be the same type of stem cell we're looking for, but if we can find the same cell that's from a lung, then we can repair lungs. Okay, we can't use liver cells to create the lungs, but we can, if we can find lung cells, we can. We also know that lungs will regenerate to a certain extent after they've been damaged, because there are papers describing the lung damage after someone's had flu. You lose a lot of alveoli, the little air sacs in your lungs, and a lot of those start to be regenerated after the flu. So we know your lungs have a limited capacity to regenerate. So there's a big hint that those stem cells were in there in the first place. So the holy grail that we have been after is the stem cell that could repair our damaged lungs, or even better, replace our lungs completely. Seems mad, seems completely science fiction that could possibly happen. One of the big advantages of that is that it would be made up out of your cells. So there's no issue with transplantation, rejection, or anything like that. They're your cells. There would be no steroids, you wouldn't have to worry. It would be almost the perfect cure. Okay? Sounds impossible. Okay, so if you remember what we talked about a couple of years ago, there was an experiment done, and of course, remember these experiments are done by the time they're reported in a paper, they're probably it's probably a year after the original experiments were done, probably more. So what's actually going on now is not the same as what was reported at the time. But about 2 to 3 years ago, they took mouse lungs, and they were able to strip away all the cells, and what that left was a sort of a structure that all the cells had been sitting in, like a network. And you could then take mouse stem cells for lungs, repopulate that entire structure, and form completely reformed lungs again. So it was that. If you remember the talk at the time, that was really amazing. That's verging on a miracle, basically. However, at the time, we noted that the lungs that were remade, you could put back into rats, but they only lasted about 30 minutes. So there was a lot more work to do. But in principle, we can rebuild lungs from nothing using a stem cell, or nearly nothing. It needs a structure. That is the picture I think I used last time. If I can get that to play, which I might be able to if I no. It will show you that these lungs, come on, there we go. Let's see if we can run this. These are, yes, these are, come on, you can do it. An error here. Don't want that one. Okay, it's not going to do it. What these were, that was just a movie of a pair of lungs that have been regenerated. They're blowing air down the windpipe, and the lungs are expanding and contracting exactly as you would expect a pair of lungs to do.
Was that the mouse lungs?
This is mouse.
Right.
So quite small. Right, back to where we were. So,
I was reading yesterday's paper about pigs, lungs, eyes.
Absolutely spoiling it.
spoiling the surprise. So, with those lungs, they didn't last longer than half an hour. So I've got to give you the whole story. And there are a few issues. And when you've got that structure and it's looks like it's very encouraging, you can actually breathe if you pump air into it. Then you think, well, can we really do this? So they start to look for problems. And one problem with stem cells, so if there's a stem cell, one problem with stem cells is they can go this way and divide in an uncontrolled way and cause a lung tumour. So obviously we don't want that. And we want to learn how to control them, stop them from doing that. And I've taken this from a paper that talks about doing that. Well, what these people did was learn how to, instead of making them go that way, they have discovered how to make a stem cell go on to form brand new alveoli. These are the air sacs in the lungs. I think this is still a mouse. And it divides really nicely and you get a nice new structure. So you've repaired lungs, theoretically. That was one problem. The other big problem surgically is when they put the lungs back in, they'd grown new lungs and they put them back into the mice, the rats it should say, I think there. They connected them up and tried to make them work like lungs. They wouldn't work. And essentially what happened was the lungs would just fill up with fluid and be useless. And what they think was happening was that when you connect up these new blood vessels, which have never had blood in them, they've just been grown de novo, brand new, they've never had any blood anywhere near them, not too surprisingly, they tended to leak. And that was no good. So we've identified a couple of problems, solved one, but we've still got this one. However, in the news this morning,
Sorry.
in Science translation, okay, so this is Science, this is one of the top two probably science publications in the world, so this is high quality stuff. That's the front page this week. I haven't got it, I just got a picture of it. And whereas before we had sort of a beaker with a pair of lungs growing in it, this is a bigger beaker with lots of ways to get fluids in and out. But inside there, doesn't look a lot like it, but inside there is a pair of lungs growing, and this is a pig lung, so this is a big animal. Okay, so a lot of the time we used pigs as experimental animals to work with organ transplants, because an organ developed in a pig that is altered so that it won't be rejected by humans is the perfect size and shape and has the right sort of hormonal reactivity to be put straight into one of us to a large extent. So now we've moved on to something that's actually the right size to go in a human. We've grown it quite nicely in culture. I think there's another picture here. Yes. So that must have been an empty. That one must be empty. But this red stuff isn't blood, by the way. The medium you use to culture tissue culture cells uses a red pigment which goes orange if it goes too acidic, or yellow if it goes too alkaline. I think that's how it goes. It's an indicator for pH. It's incredibly sensitive. So as long as it stays red, you know your culture's fine. So in this case, that's doing well. Okay. Not quite as gory as it looks. But that's a pair of lungs growing in this large incubator. As I say, it's the cover story. Right, so what can we do with these lungs? So what they did was they took a pig and they removed one of its lungs, not both, one. they took the stem cells from that lung and they regrew that lung. Okay, so meanwhile the pig's woken up, gone about its business, because this whole process probably takes a couple of months to do, right? They've grown that new lung and then they've put it back into the pig it came from. Because of the potential issue with blood vessel leakage, they haven't connected it up to the blood vessel system in the pig. They just want to test whether this organ will carry on living in where it should be. It's a viable organ, it doesn't die. And it also, it's connected up to the airways though, so that some air can get into it, but any air that gets into it will not, the oxygen in that will not be able to be moved into the blood because it's not connected up. Okay. So at the moment, it is not yet useful as a lung in this context because it's not doing the gas transfer bit. The next thing they did was they stimulated the lungs to grow blood vessels, and they did that using minute little particles, which are another modern invention to a large extent, coated in a growth hormone, and successfully got this transplanted lung to grow quite a lot of blood vessels. So now it's actually now growing its blood vessels in situ. And that organ remained completely viable with no issues, no problems, no complications for 2 months so far. And that's the point that they, that's gone off now. That's the point that they stopped that's where they've reported their experiment. Okay, so we can wait for that to cool down. So what we have got is full-size lungs, the potential to develop full-size lungs, a way to get around the problem with blood vessels, and we can test that now because almost certainly what they've already done is they've developed that model, and they once it's grown its own blood vessels, they will try and connect it up to the animal's blood vessel system. And if that all goes well, they've got a working lung in an animal that's been grown from stem cells, which in 2 to 3 years is incredible. And of course the next step will be to start developing that in people.
Won't it change the taste of the bacon in the pig?
It might do.
What happens to the pig though if it dies? It's not used for bacon?
It's still alive. It's got
Dead, yes.
Oh,
Yeah, you've given me the opportunity to tell my story about pigs now. I believe it or not, I was once in a glider with someone who did experiments on these pigs.
Really?
That's the end of the story. That's all. And we talked while we were gliding, because she was sort of transporting me around for the thrill of being in the glider, which was really good. If you ever get the chance, it's you feel like you're sitting in midair and there's no engine, there's no nothing. And they were talking about developing these pigs, and at that time they were what you have to do is make sure all animals are infected with a certain number of viruses that they've got in their own. They may have been there for thousands of years, and they're called endoviruses, and they've got to make sure that those won't reactivate once transplanted into a human, because that would mess things up.
But aren't they specially reared, the animals?
They are now. That was the work they were doing then.
Oh, I see.
This was 1988-ish,
Oh, I see.
something like that.
So if you grow in the lungs,
Yeah.
obviously you'll have to leave it for a certain time. Would they keep on growing all the time if you just left them? Or you have to control the size that they're growing to?
Once they've been transplanted,
Yeah.
they would. But that's obviously an issue that they're going to have to test. But from everything we've done so far, it's so remarkable that they grow into lungs in the first place. That a lung is full of different tissues that know when to start and stop growing. So, in all likelihood, it will grow to a certain extent and then start acting like a normal lung, or at least a lot better than having a damaged lung.
So could they grow them for perhaps young children, babies or anything at all? Or?
I would imagine that's possible, because you're growing you're taking the tissue from the patient and then growing it in situ and then giving it them back. So whatever the patient's age and status is should be replicated. But a lot of this stuff we just don't know yet. This has come so far so quickly. A lot of those questions are the next questions they're going to have to start asking, because there's an awful lot of safety considerations involved.
So what do they just use a mixture of stem cells, do you think?
I can show you the paper.
So I just wonder what sort of tissues were actually forming in that level. There'll obviously be different sorts of epithelial tissues, but did it actually form any blood vessels?
It had some blood vessels. I think they're not entirely clear because it had. They didn't. They explicitly. So there you go. They explicitly say. We transplanted these lungs without the creation of a pulmonary artery and anastomosis. So there must have been something to connect it onto, but they didn't connect it.
Yeah, so not only were there sort of lung tissue, but there were specialised things like the vascular system.
It's incredible. It actually forms a network of blood vessels, and you can make
afferent and efferent vessels.
It seems that way. They don't go into a huge amount of detail.
No, but the fact that they're there at all.
But this is not the. I'm going to tell you of another paper in a sec where they get very bullish about what they found. This is a bit more moderate, and they don't make massive claims. But the press article that was in the BBC this morning.
No, I saw it in the paper. Yeah.
Couldn't resist saying this. We could be growing new lungs in 5 to 10 years. But there's no way of knowing that.
When I read it in the paper, I thought, yeah, carry on.
That's a good response.
From what I've
read
coming here, no way, yeah.
Yeah, but considering how far they've come,
but they have made progress.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
Is it just lungs we're talking about here, or hearts?
It is being done on everything.
Because I could do with a few new bits.
I can do you another talk. I can.
There'll be pink bits, Doug.
26.
I can do you a heart talk next month if you want. I'll find out. I've been concentrating on lungs.
It was my brain I was worried.
Brains might be a bit of a big ask at the moment.
Oh dear.
Right. So. Okay, that's half an hour up. Okay, so that's amazing progress. But while I was writing this morning, I was looking for anything else that may have happened, and indeed, 6 months ago, in February, there's a group in China. Okay, so China, immediately you're thinking.
Can I book one of them?
It's China. You start thinking ethics. They've raced ahead. Anyway.
Yeah.
That will carry on further down. We'll talk about that.
It's the bronchiectasis bit I'm interested in.
Yeah, well, they have bronchiectasis patients in 2 patients. They've used the same technology with stem cells in a different way, and they essentially seem to have affected some repair of bronchiectasis in these lungs. So, bronchiectasis is essentially the loss of lung function. Loss of alveoli, the patient tends to do a lot of coughing and be very breathless. And this is the bit that's different, obviously, this time is we're actually relating this to real symptoms in human people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the link, which won't work, obviously. First of all, they did an experiment in mice. They transplanted these stem cells in. They then have a look at what's happened, and they're expecting to see new lung structures developed. And indeed, they saw new alveoli and a new blood structure grown in mouse lungs. So, being China, they could rush straight ahead and do a couple of people. Now that's the bit probably where our scientists would say, well, we couldn't do that, could we? That's why we're not the first.
We don't have enough prisoners.
Yeah, or whatever it was. 2 people with bronchiectasis, breathlessness, all the rest of it, were given lung stem cells through bronchoscopy, so not even an operation, just going down with a bronchoscope. And they followed them now for at least a year. I think it's 2 years now. This happened in 2016, so 2 years now. Both patients described relief of multiple symptoms, coughing and breathlessness. CT imaging showed regional recovery of the dilated structure. So around the bronchiectasis there were changes which were beneficial to the patient. The patient's symptoms improved, which is always a good sign. And even lung function, I don't know why that's been underlined, that says lung function, even lung function began to recover 3 months after transplantation, and that was maintained for a year. Okay, sounds absolutely fantastic. So imagine if we could get rid of bronchiectasis, if we could get rid of even if an infected area in somebody's lung, and do that and restore the function.
For a large fee, I can volunteer E to do any function.
I've noticed how you volunteer E for an awful lot.
So they didn't take the disease bit out at all.
They just added. I mean,
Just
bronchiectasis is sort of a damaged area. It's not really.
Yeah.
It's not really infected with anything. So
It becomes infected though because there's no blood supply, so
Yeah.
it just becomes a breeding ground then.
and another paper has been done on bronchiectasis, which describes if they're fungally sensitive, just like with asthma, then they tend to do worse. So we have to treat the Aspergillus in bronchiectasis
Yeah.
as well as in
Yeah.
asthma and
That's right, yeah.
yeah. So that's true. The guy's Professor Wei-Zhou. The trial in China has been licensed, blah, 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 blah. Up until now, the team claimed to have performed 80 stem cell transplants in total. So now belief is starting to be suspended a little, involving different categories of respiratory diseases, including bronchiectasis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and interstitial lung disease, that should say. So, from being too good to be true, it's now starting to look like believe it when I see it sort of thing. Too good to be true. These claims are certainly massively exciting, but we've been here before and been disappointed. Remember, there was a stem cell-ish 2 or 3 years ago, which we talked about, turned out to be fraud, and that was based in Japan. This is based in China. In China, we know they're really trying to push their scientific expertise and their ability politically. They want the kudos, and when you have those things together, you tend to overclaim what you're capable of doing. So the acid test lets them tell other groups, and this was put in a paper, so we know what they did. Let's see if other groups can replicate those results, and if they can, then perhaps we can start getting excited. Even then, in the West, you would have to go through all sorts of ethics.
I was going to say the ethics committee is.
We'd go into meltdown. So they would be very, very careful about how they did it. And indeed, what often happens is you have to wait until you've demonstrated it's safe before you can start doing this sort of thing.
They were using the patient's own stem cells, were they?
They must have been. That's the principle.
You said they were transplanted, but...
Yeah. I need to read that paper to find out more about it. The other bit that put me off again was this guy. Where is he? Professor Zhou was quoted at the end of the paper as saying, again, he was saying a cure in 5 to 10 years. So again, sounds great. Let's see what happens when other people try it. But that's a massive amount of progress that's happened in 2 or 3 years compared to where we were. Looks like they might be getting up to the point where they can try limited restorations. You can do either of these. I mean, rather than replacing entire lungs, we can maybe try repairs and that type of thing. I don't know how we would do that. We're not a surgical organisation. We're an infectious disease organisation, and this is a whole different range of expertise. So we would have to do this with somebody else helping to do it. But maybe we're looking at the world in 10 years' time. I don't know, I seem to say that a lot when I was stood here. Don't I?
Well, they were asking for volunteers to come here first.
For aspergillosis, yeah. I think they would go in first for something like bronchiectasis. They want to repeat those experiments. And of course, a lot of people with bronchiectasis also have aspergillosis, so that might be the way into their technology. They're going to want to claim that China is wonderful and the only place in the world you can do it maybe is China. But as somebody said, the status of these 80 transplants and who they were done in and the ethical considerations of how it was done are different. Would be different too. Here we wouldn't know how it. We essentially probably wouldn't be able to go as fast ahead as they've been able to go.
It'd be interesting to see what our transplant team thought about it.
It's just come out. That came out 6 months ago, and the other one's come out this week.
They do lung transplant, don't they here? So.
But you would need all the stem cell stuff as well.
I realise that, but I just thought, I wonder what their view on that literature would be.
It puts them out of a job, to be honest.
Because I'm sure they'd have a few comments.
They would. There are loads and loads of caveats and caution and everything else involved. But considering that even thinking about that was science fiction 10 years ago,
Think of the talk that
it's
the
incredible.
transplant people gave.
I know. That was a real eye-opener, I thought.
Well, just that alone,
Yeah.
that talk, I thought was really quite good and very, like you say, it opened our eyes quite a bit, didn't it?
Yeah.
So if you think of just that in normal transplant, normal, as normal as it can be, but if you think of that and their experience, then that is, so I'd just be curious as to what they're.
We've got two pieces of the jigsaw here.
Unfortunately, both those people who gave that talk have moved on now, but I do know other people in there.
There's only me and you stick around, Chris.
Seems like it, doesn't it?
Well, that could be seen as bad shifting stuff. I'm not quite sure yet.
No, let's not get onto that.
The interesting thing about that work, not this one, but the one previous, is that they actually put bugs back in those lungs as well. It said that they're a normal sort of bacterial load for.
Don't know. Is that what?
Well, that's what they said in the abstract.
Carl, you're good eyesight. Should have flashed that on faster, shouldn't I? Yeah, I know. It's. Don't know. Too much, too good. Yeah. So this is very much a wait and see situation. So that was originally meant to be 10 minutes, but I've stretched that out quite a bit, which I hope that was informative. So Beth, if she were here, would talk about the wallet purse cards. We've had 3 or 4 requests in the clinic and here today for these cards, so they're actually really popular. They are nearly done. There was a bit on it about damp homes that I changed on Monday, and Prof Denning did another little bit on Tuesday, but I think that's them done now, so we'll get those printed up fairly soon. Okay.
Can you give them out here as well as in clinic?
We give them out everywhere. It's
Just if you have to wait for the next time you come to clinic.
I think
if you've just been, it could be a while.
Well, we would probably think of we could send them out to people and stuff like that, I would imagine. Right, so we're coming up to a break.
Attempted. Why does that say attempted the patient survey? Was it that hard that people couldn't finish it?
There were people who did not finish it. Yeah.
Oh, right, sorry.
So I can talk. This is my second half talk. So you stop reading. Chris wanted to chime in for 10 minutes. Now that she's here.
Only 10 minutes.
Hmm?
Only 10 minutes.
Well, it must be for that.
Well,
Well, you know me, I'm quick and to the
you know what
point,
happens.
so.
You give her an inch.
We'll do the register after, but there's been some comments made in the clinic, and I'd like to kind of get to the bottom of it and see what your views are. Because as we grow, we feel that some people are a little bit let down on what we're delivering. So if you don't mind, if you can, yeah, because I guess if you're together, if you can share one, because it'll be the same view, I think, anyway. So basically, what's been said recently is that people, particularly people who have travelled a long way, have come to clinic and
That one?
Yeah.
they felt that they didn't get the questions answered, or they didn't have enough time.
Oh, I should take a copy of that.
Patience, and just a little bit like, what did I come there for, and a bit frustrated. Thankfully, given the size of our service and how long we've been running, it is only 2 people, so I suppose if you think of how many patients we see and how big our clinics are, I guess it's not anything to be too twitchy about. However, the fact that they raised it did have me a little bit,
What's this for?
Is there anything we can do to make that better?
Can use that.
So I've just put together a couple of questions, if you can answer them for me. If you've got any of your own comments, feel free to add it to the bottom. If we're not getting it right, we need to know we're not getting it right and see if we can do anything about that. And we have some nice new nurses here, so we may be able to find a way through that. And it does apply to both clinics, so Wednesday and Friday. And we know Friday's chaos, but that still doesn't mean that we can't figure it out. So if you could do that, I've got the register for later, and then if you're having a break, we can circulate that. And then just let me know.
He's getting handed back in today then?
If you don't mind, yeah, if you could just, because they're only short questions, they're not.
It's not homework.
No, you don't need to do homework.
Okay.
As I say, if I've forgotten anything on there and you think, oh, well, you've not asked that, then by all means scribble it on the bottom and I'll consider that. I just thought I'd get a feel for things and then I'll feed it back to the team.
Chris, do you want us to answer?
Okay, I think we should take a break there.
Even though we're not.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. I mean,
Go and get a cup of tea. Some of you are going to have to stay and do your homework, your coursework. Anyone's got questions for our nurse over there, just queue up. This lot with my laptop power pack, this box here, massive though it is, has stopped working, so we are no longer online. And you're not being recorded, so you can all relax now.
He's a doctor.
Is he a doctor?
You what?
You're a doctor?
What do you think?
I think you're trained to be a doctor. That was a very cagey answer. So Bongo's with us, came over to do the medical master's degree from Uganda. I don't know which part of Uganda. You'll do all of this.
Yeah.
So he's going home next week, and he's going to give us a talk about how he loved working with our team. David's got him to do all kinds of things, so it should be. There's a lot of variation in what he has to do. So. I introduce Felix Bongoman, likes to be called Bongo.
Bongo, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm actually very privileged to meet you all and give my talk on my journey from Uganda to Manchester and back to Uganda next week. Especially that it is my last 7 days in the UK. It was really well timed. So I'm just going to give you briefly who I am, what I've learned from here, what I've contributed to the scientific world, from the data I obtained from here and how I will translate that into my practice in Uganda. I was born in the northern part of Uganda in the late 1980s in a district called Kitgum, and this is the Ugandan coat of arms, and this is the Ugandan flag, and it has everything concerning Uganda. These are waves from Lake Victoria and Lake Albert, giving River Nile, which flows to Egypt and Mediterranean Sea. And this is the bright sunshine in Uganda. This is the protective shield and the arrows that we use to protect ourselves within Uganda. And this is the drum that we use for gathering and big celebration. This is Ugandan cock, it is only in Uganda. And this is Ugandan crane, only in Uganda, with the colors of Ugandan flag on it. And of course, the two main cash crops that we have in Uganda is coffee and cotton. Then, being a God-fearing country, the motto of Uganda is then forgotten, my country. And the three colors in Ugandan flag is just to demonstrate how proud we are to be black, our sunshine, then the blood that we have, that brotherhood, that all of us are one, irrespective of the color. Then the white is for peace. Then the crested crane is standing on one leg to demonstrate that Uganda is a developing country. And this is me at our home. This is a granary we use for keeping groundnuts, sorghum, millet, all the cereals. And this is like a living room. So most of my primary and secondary education were in northern part of Uganda, in this part called Kitgum and Gulu district. The capital city is this side, called Kampala, where I'm going to live for the next many years. I did my medical degree training in a university called Gulu University, still in northern Uganda. That was between 2009 and 2014. Then after graduating as a medical doctor, I worked in a hospital, a missionary hospital, that is called St. Mary's Hospital, which is also in Gulu. So I've just been living around northern Uganda. Then after that, I came to Manchester to study my master's in medical mycology. That was 2015 and 2016. And I graduated with Professor Malcolm being my witness. Then after that, I started working with the University of Manchester alongside Global Action Fund for Fungal Infection with Professor David Denning, but based at the National Aspergillosis Center. So my work has both been with National Aspergillosis Center and the Global Action Fund for Fungal Infection. And so my contribution, I will divide it to those that contributes to aspergillosis, while at NAC and Global Action Fund for Fungal Infection. So, of course, Uganda appears very small in the map of Africa, but it is almost the same size as the UK if you superimpose the map of Uganda on that of the UK. And the difference is that Uganda is 135,000 square kilometers and the UK is 145. So just 10,000 square kilometers different. But the population of Uganda is only 38 million, and that of the UK is 64 million. And the population of UK is more within cities. Meanwhile, for us, it is more of countryside. And of course, because this is a fungal group, the burden of fungal disease in the UK is completely different from the burden of fungal disease in Uganda. So if we look at the biggest burden is mainly in patients who are transplant, chronic lung diseases, and other underlying medical conditions. And we see that majority of patients are actually ABPA and severe asthma with fungal sensitization. And of course, a significant number of patients, up to 3,600, are estimated to be living with CPA in the UK, and up to 24,000 in Europe, and 3 million globally. And you can see HIV-related fungal diseases like cryptococcal meningitis, only 100 cases, and pneumocystis, pneumonia, on less than 600 cases. But if you look at the burden of fungal disease in Uganda, it is completely different. In that, the most common is then fungal disease of the air and skin, mainly in school children, which affects up to 1.3 million with ringworms. And a bigger proportion of fungal infection are again HIV related. For example, you see up to 4,000, actually to 5,000 Ugandans get cryptococcal meningitis every year, and that is less than 100 in the UK. And if you compare pneumocystis pneumonia, up to nearly 900 people with pneumocystis every year, and up to more than 40,000 actually in children. And if you compare the data with that of the UK, it is massively quite different. And you see allergic fungal diseases like ABPA and SARS, again, the burden is lower. And CPA, 2,000, so more burden of CPA in the UK, for example, compared to Uganda. But because we do not have a good diagnostics in Uganda, and there are no studies, actually only one study has been done concerning chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, and that is where I met David, because he came to the hospital where I was working at St. Mary's Hospital, and he gave a talk. So I was one of the junior doctors. We then asked him several questions around aspergillosis. Then that is how I ended up working with him. So of the 398 patients who were treated for TB in my hospital, about 4.9 were found to be having chronic pulmonary aspergillosis. And a similar study was replicated in Nigeria, where it found about 8.7% of 208 patients who were smear negative. They were not microbiologically confirmed to be having TB, but she found that up to 8.7% of those patients who are treated as smear negative TB actually have chronic pulmonary aspergillosis. So I've put my contribution to what I did at the National Aspergillosis Center, as well as what I've done with Gaffey, but I restricted it only to studies that I did related to aspergillosis, and not my other studies several other studies that I did on other fungal diseases. So the first study that I did at the National Aspergillosis Center was because previously CPA patients or chronic pulmonary aspergillosis patients were only thought to be having structural lung diseases and do not have any other immune defects. And so we wanted to find out and see if that is really true. So we looked at the different cellular components of the immune system. We looked at the T cells, T and B cells, which are for cellular immunity, and natural killer cells, which is what we are born with, resistance, which we are already born with. And we found that a significant number of patients, actually up to 12.5, have isolated defects in their natural killer cells and B cells, and only few patients have T cell defects. And this would be very useful in investigating patients immunologically and see who can benefit from maybe gamma interferon supplementation, and how we can use these markers then to prognosticate disease severity and mortality. So if we get more data, probably it can be translated into a very good biomarker for follow-up and stratifying patients. Then the other big study that I did was to evaluate clinical outcomes at 12 months of 206 patients who have chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, and we published this in PLOS ONE in April this year. And you can see that between 2014 and 2016, we had 223 referrals to the National Aspergillosis Center. I excluded 17 patients because there was kind of missing data, or they did not meet everything that I needed to work out a proper clinical outcome data, including things like St. George's questionnaire, weight, the dyspnea score, IgG, and all other lab investigations that I wanted. And we found that about 64 patients already came when they were either on antifungal or they were treated, and 142 came when they were completely antifungal naive. And you can see the complex dichotomy here of the kind of treatment that was initiated at the National Aspergillosis Center. How many came on itraconazole? How many were initiated on itraconazole? And about 20% were initiated on voriconazole, mainly because they have either very large aspergillomas or they had resistance already. The first isolate, the first sample had resistance to itraconazole, or they were presumed to be having more severe disease with more than 70 or 80 score on their St. George's, a total St. George's score. And we did the same for those who were previously on antifungal therapy. And at 12 months, after following each patient for 12 months, then we evaluated to see who discontinued therapy, who had therapy change, and who stayed on the same treatment if you were started on itraconazole, who stayed on itraconazole for the whole 12 months, and who stayed on voriconazole for the whole 12 months. And you can see that up to nearly 30% of the patients discontinued therapy at some point, either because of adverse events or development of resistance, and some few patients who had isolated lung diseases were resected and they were allowed to be off antifungal treatment. And a few patients were also changed to a different antifungal agent, maybe because of, and mainly those were changed to posaconazole, and very few were changed to isavuconazole as well, maybe because of adverse events to the earlier triazoles. Yeah, but it is also good to know that up to 40% of the patients then stayed on treatment at least for 12 months. And for those whose treatment got stopped at some point because of maybe adverse events or you can see from here there were about 56 patients. Then I worked again with Chris, and we added more data on all patients who stopped treatment, and we managed to get data for 102 patients who at least stopped therapy for 1 month. And out of those 102 patients, actually, we found that 42 patients had to be restarted, and they met a reasonable definition of relapse that we use 4 criteria. Either they had, if they had positive sputum culture for Aspergillus, negative, then it turned to be positive, or if their IgG was going down and it is now rising up, so we consider that as a relapse, or if the intracavitary aspergilloma is enlarging. So we use all those parameters to define relapse. And we see that this is for all the patients. This is for all the patients. And we could see that patients who had bilateral disease on both lungs or aspergilloma in multiple lobes, they were more likely to relapse before 6 months than patients who had only disease on one side of the lung. And that is what we are calling early relapse, being more common in patients who have disease on both sides of the lung. And because now patients who develop adverse events or have cross intolerance to the earlier azoles, some of them are started on isavuconazole. So we evaluated data for 20 patients who were initiated on itraconazole before the end of 2016. And we compared that data to patients who were also initiated on voriconazole before the end of 2016 and see if the rate of discontinuation or continuation of therapy differs with those who are on isavuconazole and those who were initiated on voriconazole. And you can see that at least 9 out of the 20 patients continued voriconazole for at least 6 months, isobuconazole for at least 6 months. But there were more patients who continued voriconazole more than isobuconazole. But and mainly it was because of adverse drug reactions for both agents. But it was interesting for us to know that at least 25% of patients who even are intolerant to voriconazole or itraconazole can tolerate isobuconazole for at least 6 months. So we think isobuconazole might actually be a good therapeutic agent for long-term treatment of patients with chronic pulmonary aspergillosis. But this did not have anything to do with clinical outcomes. Our patients were improving while they were on isobuconazole, and that is another data set that Chris is helping us to put together, and we evaluate clinical outcome of patients who have started on isobuconazole, and we have about 50 patients on that already. So this has already gone for publication in Journal of Antimicrobial Chemotherapy. We also did, this has been accepted in mycosis. We also evaluated for patients who are started on micafungin, because we know patients who have pan-azo resistance or who have cross intolerance to all triazoles. Up to 10% of our patients actually initiated on micafungin or liposomal amphotericin B, and we had data for 19 patients with 21 OPAT episodes, outpatient parenteral antimicrobial therapy episodes. And after evaluating, the patient who had the most was on IV micafungin for a total of 248 days. And it was interesting for us to know that there were no line-related complications related to micafungin therapy, and that was very good. And for the patient who had data on St. George's, we had 18 patients. At least we saw that 50% of the patients at the end of 3 months after starting IV micafungin were either stable or had improvement in their quality of life. But it did not have any impact on their weight, so the weight remained the same, and there was no impact on their dyspnea as assessed by the Medical Research Council dyspnea scale.
What's the line?
This was the peripheral line complication like phlebitis or infection.
So this treatment is done with IV?
Yeah, with peripheral inserted central line catheter.
Right,
yeah.
and that complication would refer to an infection of the line?
Infection of the line or any other related, because it can be a focus of systemic infection, biofilm.
What has that got to do with micafungin?
Because it is given IV.
But all that non-line related complication during micafungin therapy
yeah,
it's not really got anything to do with micafungin itself.
But it is about
the person who's actually put the line in.
Yeah, but it is about safety, because the drug is given IV. So is it safe to give it IV and patients go on?
Some of the complications are micafungin related that could happen.
Yeah, but was less than 2%.
Okay.
Low levels of magnesium, low levels of sodium was in less than 2% of the patients. So
we can use itraconazole alongside voriconazole. It's just as well accepted.
Yeah.
You say it's a little bit better accepted, but there's only one in it. So
the which one?
So the previous slide.
Yeah.
Isobuconazole is
up to 25% of the patients who were actually.
So N is 9.
Yeah.
Continued therapy versus N is 11.
11 continued therapy.
So
there was no statistical difference between 9 and 11.
So isobuconazole we can use it.
Yeah, we can use it.
Yeah,
we can use isobuconazole.
Okay.
And I was even stressing that up to 25% of patients who were intolerant of either itra or vori were able to tolerate isobuconazole for at least 6 months.
But we think isobuconazole may be cross-resistant with voriconazole resistant?
I'm not exactly sure about that, because
you don't know that yet.
there are other mechanisms that confer resistance to all the triazoles, and some are selective, only maybe for voriconazole, and some for isavuconazole.
Hopeful, isn't it?
Yeah. So.
Why didn't you use posaconazole?
The what?
Why didn't you use posaconazole?
To compare this data.
Rather than the voriconazole.
Yeah, because.
More side effects.
Yeah, that's true. But we just compared the available data we have, because there was some work already being done by Isabel and Chris. They evaluated already posaconazole. So we did not want to duplicate data that was published last month or in May. So we did not want to duplicate that. So we just compared voriconazole, which is already well established for the treatment of CPA. Isavu is quite new. So we wanted a comparison between something new and something old.
And voriconazole is a huge amount of data on voriconazole.
Yeah, a huge amount of data.
And it's also...
and this is the first data that we have on long-term...
You're comparing it with treatment standard.
Yeah. And this is the first data to present use of isavuconazole for long-term treatment of chronic pulmonary aspergillosis.
And notice how many times Chris Harris appears as an author on these papers.
Yeah,
all the data comes from Chris.
Because it comes from she gives the
she's always there.
Yeah, she gives the data. So yeah. So my perspective of chronic pulmonary aspergillosis is that we need a good characterization and predictors of disease recurrence. If you, because it would be good to know if you stop treatment, who is most likely to redevelop the disease or who will require retreatment. So if we can characterize that would be useful. And we need to, because we have seen that 50% of people who use micafungin only for 3 months were either stable or improved clinically. So we want to know, is it efficacious or safe enough to use IV micafungin for long-term therapy of chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, but given as outpatient? Then, of course, we need new orally bioavailable antifungals, because even if 25% of patients were able to tolerate isavuconazole when they were intolerant of other azoles, I think that is still a low percentage. So if we could get a more very tolerable oral antifungal agent, that would be useful for long-term treatment of aspergillosis. And if we could get objective prognostic score, the way other disease conditions like cancers, they have their scores. If we could develop one excellent score for chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, that would be good to predict maybe 5-year or 1 year, 10-year mortality and recurrence as well. And that will be good to stratify a patient just at baseline and see who needs intensive therapy and who needs standard treatment.
And that's partly to save a whole group of patients from receiving intensive treatment that don't need it, so they won't have all the side effects and all. They have a better quality of life.
Yeah, so if we could prognosticate and stratify the risk at baseline, that would be very good. It will tailor treatment. And if we could use biomarkers like the CD4, CD8, CD56 that I studied previously, if we could use that as a follow-up tool, it would also be good, because that is nearly done here as a routine. So if we could put that into a better use, that would be very good. And we need to know short-term and long-term benefits of combination antifungal therapy. If we give itraconazole or voriconazole plus maybe micafungin or caspofungin in chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, does that have any benefit, or there's no need even to combine antifungal agents from different classes? And because some of these adverse drug reactions to antifungals are dose related. So if instead of giving you 200 milligrams of itraconazole, we can just give 50 plus 100 of micafungin, and it gives better or equal outcome compared to 200, and you have less side effects. That would be a very good strategy. And it
would be cheaper.
And it would be cheaper. So we would. That is something that probably we could look at. Then, for my case in Uganda, definitely we need something which is a point of care diagnostic test for CPA, because we do not have the ELISA complex investigation. So if we could just get a finger prick blood sample, then you put on a small device, and that can show you your level of IgG either quantitatively or semi-quantitatively. That would be very useful and simplify life instead of waiting for results for 1 week or more.
So those new point of care tests for invasive,
yeah.
Are they being thought of as useful for that purpose?
No, because the difficulty with Aspergillus specific IgG is actually with the cutoffs. It is very difficult to, because the Ugandans will have different cutoffs from the European controls. So that has been a very difficult area. And we also need to define attributable mortality to CPA, because we know there are different underlying conditions. So most of our mortalities are crude. You cannot pinpoint that this is 100% caused by CPA. So if there is a way that we could define attributable mortality, and that would also help us to advocate for better health care. Then developing and validating of CPA disease specific, the way we have maybe non-small cell cancer specific prognostic patient reported outcomes, and for other disease conditions they have their specific patient reported outcome measures. Because if we use what the patient tells us to stratify the disease severity or treatment need for that specific patient, that would be very useful. We tried, I think for now it is St. George's that is being used, but St. George's is more generic. So if we could get a more specific one for CPA alone, that
we're doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Then yeah, that is my perspective. I'm glad that that you're doing it. Then for Gaffey, that was for National Aspergillosis Center. Then for Gaffey, I've also done some several work for Gaffey, but one of the most significant ones is actually my work that I did to evaluate and to update globally, worldwide burden of fungal diseases, and I stratified them in this beautiful figure.
So what is Gaffey?
Gaffey is Global Action Fund for Fungal Infection. And David Denning is Professor David Denning is the chief executive of Gaffey. So we worked with him, Sarah Gago, who is a scientist at Manchester Fungal Infection Group, and Rita Oladele, who is from University of Lagos.
So it's a body which is trying to increase awareness of the levels of fungal infection.
Levels of fungal
across the world, in all different countries with all different economic status. And I'm trying to help everyone diagnose and treat fungal infections.
And availability of those diagnostics, and also to inform stakeholders like the WHO how common these fungal infections are and which one should be included. For example, in neglected tropical disease list, which antifungals are essential and should be put on the essential medicine list. And the latest that we did, I will show you in the last slide, is to see which diagnostic are essential and should be put on the WHO essential diagnostic list. So you can see that up to 1 billion people worldwide have skin, hair, and nail infection, and recurrent vulvovaginal candidiasis, and up to where we have chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, ABPA in asthma, and other diseases. This is prevalent. What happens globally? Then every year, of course, we get 2 million cases of oral candidiasis, patients with histoplasmosis, with pneumocystis pneumonia, invasive aspergillosis, cryptococcosis in HIV, and other rare fungal diseases as well. So this gives a very good spectrum of fungal diseases and how common each fungal disease is. Then on top of that, because we realize that in my country, for example, in Uganda, we cannot use the diagnostic criteria, that is put by the European Respiratory Society or by the Infectious Disease Society of America, because that is very resourceful country. And the level of investigation, the CT scan that they use, the immunological investigation, does not exist in Uganda. So we had to sit together and form a consensus definition that can be used to diagnose chronic pulmonary aspergillosis in low resource setting. And this is just published in August. And this is the third day of August. No, because this is public health. Yeah, so then we created an algorithm that can be used to, if you follow this stepwise, then see who is most likely to have chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, and ruling out other mimickers of chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, especially TB. So if you can rule TB out, then follow these steps, then it is very easy to diagnose chronic pulmonary aspergillosis, then even in resource limited setting. Then the last work that I did with Gafi, one of the last work that I did with Gafi is to organize for a big meeting that we invited experts from 30 countries, and there were 95 in number, and we gathered in Kampala in April, in Uganda, in April this year, to come out with a consensus statement of what an essential diagnostic is in patients who have advanced HIV disease and for those with serious fungal infection. And that is where we put across tests like Aspergillus specific IgG, and tests for cryptococcosis, fungal culture, direct microscopy, and we were very happy that at least many of those tests that we suggested were taken up by the World Health Organization in a document that they then published in May, and that was the success of this meeting. And with that, I would like to say thank you for the very long talk.
They've obviously been very busy.
Yeah.
I noticed you were in the middle of the front row in the lab.
Yeah, because, yeah. This is me, and this is Professor David Denning.
See, you've moved him up.
Because I was the chief organizer of the meeting. So I had to be in the middle. Yeah, then this is Nilesh from South Africa. This is Sean Bowman, the discoverer of cryptococcal antigen test. So he was also there. Then this is a guru for cryptococcal disease. And other people from Pakistan, and guys from this guy was the first person to publish a paper on beta-D-glucan called Bayashi from Japan, Tokyo. Yeah.
Any questions?
What will you do when you go back, and what's your role when you take that back to Uganda?
To Uganda, yeah. So because from here I've been doing mainly research work, so I'm then going back to clinical work to treat actively treat patients, and meanwhile also I continue with my training, then become a consultant in internal medicine and infectious diseases.
Will you go back to the hospital where you were?
No, now I'm shifting from northern Uganda. I'm now going to the capital city. Yeah.
Is it all private?
It is public, and treatment is for free.
And not only
But
is treatment for free.
Yeah, everything is for free.
The doctor doesn't get paid either.
Yeah, they will get very low payment.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You were talking about the micafungin.
Yes.
For the CPA patients, do you not have to apply for funding?
Yeah, I think for now, there should be some. I'm not exactly sure about the funding point for micafungin. Yeah.
The CPA?
Yeah.
Do you have to apply for funding?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Micafungin is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, I know, I understand that. It took 18 months for me to get
the CPS, and only 3
I remember seeing figures of a $250,000 written down. That could have been a few. Micafungin?
Yeah.
So I was
Is that still that expensive?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is his having. His having's expensive as well, yeah. And having his own can be quite expensive. Yeah. You're only allowed 3 courses and you have to have very common aspergillosis.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Unless you're exceptional, of course.
We all are.
Malcolm, I don't remember all this questions.
So that is all I had.
Going to training now.
I did mention also that you went to a couple of football matches.
Yeah, with Graham at Everton, but every time I go there, it's a loss.
So you're going home an Everton supporter.
Everton supporter.
They need all the support they can get from, I tell you.
Yeah.
Don't the women's team do better?
They used to.
They used to do.
They when it was an amateur game, they were the best.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's changed a bit. It's gone professional. And so, do you think you remember how to speak Ugandan by the time you go back there?
No, there's no language called Ugandan.
No.
Yeah, there are about 87 languages.
Wow.
And I speak one. I speak only one of.
So would you need a translator?
Yeah, I will need a translator because then the only language I can speak in Kampala is English.
So
I don't speak their language.
But almost any doctor will then need lots and lots of translators.
Yeah, so I will need a translator.
You need that here if you go to Liverpool.
Car park now.
And you room.
What's that?
And you.
We're in Manchester.
Okay.
We're outnumbers.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bongo, and
Thank you.
safe trip home.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes. Do you want to go now, or do you want me to fill the 10 minutes in? With our patient survey.
Oh, yeah.
So last year I went through every single question,
Oh, yes.
and it got a bit lengthy.
Yeah.
So I've just abbreviated. I wrote this
You
for.
have an edited version.
I have. I'm giving you the summary, and what I wrote for David a month or so ago. For some reason, I get to analyse these results because no one else will do it, essentially. So it's all the nurses collect all the data and work really hard for an entire month, and this time collected 154 questionnaires, which is no mean feat. In previous years we've only had maybe 100, so most of them are mostly filled in. So there's always a few questions that aren't quite filled in. So some of my percentages, which you're probably not going to see here actually, don't quite add up because not everybody answers all of the questions. So, comments, level of satisfaction are invited from patients on a wide range of services. We've asked us mostly the same questions year on year, so we can compare year on year. This year there have been one or two concerning issues, but mostly tiny changes. Waiting times. Surprise, surprise. The waiting time for doctors and pharmacy have risen to, dissatisfaction levels have risen to 26%. I'm sure you've all had experience of that. That is obviously something we need to give some attention, but I think we're getting more staff. I think we're getting more nurses. We're getting more consultants. And we may even divide. Because as you're probably aware, our physical constraints there, we can't actually physically get more people through in one day, and the demand is going up and up and up. So the inevitable result of that is longer waiting times, but we have detected that, and we're trying to alleviate that issue.
Not enough rooms and all the rest of it, so yeah, so we're working through those battles at the moment.
There's lots of lots of people throwing toys out of prams all over the
Presumably
place.
you've got limited control of the waiting time of pharmacy, because that's a Roland's issue.
Yeah, that's a Roland's issue, yeah. I don't know, has anyone got a view whether things were better with Roland's or worse? That's just how we're talking about, I don't think.
No strong feelings.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the way the place is set up now, which is much more open, is good. I think I don't know what people are comparing. If you compare the waiting time in a hospital pharmacy or a pharmacy in a hospital setting to the time you would wait for your pharmacy in the high street, the high street pharmacies are much quicker. The reason they're much quicker is because of customer pressure. Because if you're not quick, you don't get the scripts. In a hospital pharmacy situation, the patients are kind of captive. So there is not a problem that nobody's going to come to them if they're not quick enough. So the only way you can encourage an improvement there is really to liaise with them about, for example, typically if you leave clinic with a script and you go to the pharmacy at the end of your consultation, so you might come in for an appointment at 3, you might eventually get to the pharmacy at 4:30 or beyond, then you give them the thing. If actually, if you knew there was going to be a prescription coming out of that appointment, if that could be sent to the pharmacy at the beginning, you can pick it up and you leave. So there might be some organisation of things like that.
You can also wait an hour in X-ray, and you can wait half an hour plus for a blood test.
I've already thought my way around.
So it can be a big chunk of time.
We didn't detect large changes in those areas, but there are still quite a lot of people who are not very happy with those waiting times.
I think the other thing about that though is if you went for an X-ray by other routes, and particularly if you went for a blood test referred from your GP, so for example in Altrincham, my GP would refer me, typically you go to the Altrincham hospital, the waiting time average now is probably 2 to 3 hours for your blood test. So consequently, we typically don't go there anymore. We find in clinics on Victim, and we all drive over there. But that's only available 1 day a week. So outside of the hospital and the service we get through the clinic, even though the waiting time might be a bit longer, they look a heck of a lot better than most people experience in general practice. And a lot of these issues will be about expectation and comparison. How long do I expect to wait? So for new patients, if the reality is the time in clinic where you see a doctor is this, if you brief that in,
I always tell them that when they call. I always say make sure you bring plenty of money for drinks and that. It's something to read and because you can be there for your own. But most people, in fairness, accept that they're going to be waiting a while because of the nature of the clinic. And considering again the numbers and everything else, few people complain. I think a lot of frustration is back at pharmacy, then the stocks are low and they can't, it's things like that. That's been an issue later.
We had someone come from to the side of London and got up here after a terrible day, and they didn't actually have her drugs in. Could she come back tomorrow? Was not received well.
But I mean, you need to talk to the pharmacy because there are organisational ways to get around this. Roland's got pharmacies all over the place.
Patient contact. We seem to, this year we've only contacted 35% of patients between clinics, so at home, presumably phoning a nurse up or being phoned up for whatever reason. In 2017, 1 in 2 patients were contacted between clinics. It might be illustrative. There a comment from a patient: I had one bad experience with one of the doctors who didn't explain my treatment properly, and staff shortage, delay, return call. So they're trying to get information by phoning up, and not everybody is completely happy, and there's the low numbers of calls going in. That might be a reflection that Chris and I are answering more questions in venues like this, and you don't need to ask so many questions in between clinics. I get a lot of people asking generalised questions in Facebook every week, So that might explain part of those drops. Only slight falls in satisfaction levels for the written information, which is what we provide. Quality of the information they receive, so that can be presumably written information or oral information. Information about potential symptoms, so that you're forearmed when you go home, I guess, with what you might be feeling. Potential side effects, I presume, and inpatient stay. So pretty much stays the same as last time, so that's not a concern overly. Of concern to us in the communications group particularly is the patient's website is not being used very much. The actual use is falling, and if you were here last month you'll be aware that we're actually, as a consequence of this and other stuff we're already aware of, we are redesigning that website for better use. If Beth was here, she was going to go through that today, because they've already made a fair bit of progress, and Megan is actually playing a part in the redesign and the rewriting of the information on that website. It should be a lot less dense and a lot clearer to understand when we've finished. Our target is to have that more or less online and ready to go by Christmas. We had this and 20% have not received any information leaflet. There's a bit of an issue with information leaflets. We sort of give lots of people information leaflets when they first come to the clinic, but I suppose this is saying that they haven't seen any since, but maybe they don't need another information leaflet in between times, or maybe they don't remember. It's something that we're going to have to address somewhere or other. Is there any information leaflets that we miss out on? We've actually come up with quite a long list actually that you could think of. The things like as a list, there could be a leaflet on living in damp homes, for example, is something that I've thought fairly recently that we don't actually give any information out about that, and there's so much bad information out there on the internet. It might be nice to have a brief leaflet giving our opinion of how you should work with that, and perhaps also something that tries to persuade landlords to do something about it.
The younger clinic, it's not immediately obvious where the information leaflets are for the Aspergillosis patients. I mean, that's what I found.
Ask for a stand, but I think there is a bit of a battle there, because I think because it's a Northwest Wales centre, quite a lot of them are all about other things.
There's some in the corridor, which is... But
I think we should have our own that we put out on our clinic days, and then just take it.
Yeah, you know, if you're trying to get to your Aspergillosis patients, I think they need to be more visible.
Yeah.
Really.
So in the
I think we should have our own that goes out.
yeah, I mean in the quarterly booklet we say ask your nurse.
Yes.
But I'm aware that some of the nurses you see aren't NAC nurses, so they probably would go, oh, I don't know, or something like that.
That's right.
Whereas if you ask someone like Judy, they'd be all over it, obviously. So I've actually another leaflet I thought about is what you need is, which could be unpopular, a leaflet showing who our members of staff are, and a little photograph, so you can actually identify them when you come to clinic, which might be a good idea. Some of the nurses aren't keen on that idea, historically.
Some of the doctors aren't either.
Yeah, one in particular, yes. Yeah.
The other thing that has to go with any of that is really discipline about dealing with the sort of current and get rid of the ones that are out of date. And that's which is supported by actually putting dates on leaflets very clearly when they were produced.
Well, we do that. We do that with the information leaflets. The information leaflets have all got a year on. And the thing with information leaflets is we most of what we give out is actually a fungal infection trust information leaflet and not a hospital leaflet, because we can't get leaflets through the hospital. It takes 2 years to generate a leaflet. So we can edit those quite quickly if we need. The last bit reflect on the DNR discussion we had last time and what you've just been talking about today, essentially. So not very many people really want to know. Only about 10% people want to know about end-of-life care. 80% did not want to discuss it. So that's fair enough. At least we know what the level of demand and disinterest is likely to be. But maybe we need to do something about that. Is that a slightly odd one? A fall in happiness to participate in clinical trials. That might be artifactual from the data, but there's definitely quite a big drop in people not being happy to participate in a clinical trial, which is quite unusual for us. They're usually almost universal keenness to get involved. So maybe
he's not happy with me volunteering her all the time.
Yeah, well, we need more.
That's why they don't.
Yeah, you've stopped asking. That's the problem. Yeah. Otherwise, we are working at a very high standard of care from the levels of approval of our patients. But this is just a process of identifying the small areas that we do seem to fall short. And that is it, I think. Postal service, yeah. Oh, members of staff mentioned by name for excellent work, Debbie, Phil and Jenny. Not saying anything, but, you know, we never get mentioned.
That's like Christmas and you know, biscuits.
Somebody bought me lots of biscuits last Christmas, so I can't
There's
complain.
been monthly meetings without you, Ray, would the Chris? You are.
There was in January, Rachel and Beth did one. Don't know how it went, I wasn't here. Just a quick one before you go. Red Cross, I might be able to help with transport for people who have trouble getting here and getting back. And I said I was going to contact them. I did. And they just got back to me yesterday. And I'm having a conversation about that on Monday on the phone. So more about that next month. Next month, Friday the 3rd of September, I shall be here. Hopefully Beth will. We're thinking of getting a clean air company in to give us a talk. That might happen in September, but Beth also wants to do her big thing on how we can organise a coping with stress group. Probably separate to this group, but I had to get that up and running and running on a regular basis. It's a bit of a specialist area for Beth. So we've sort of acquired that skill and we're going to use it. So thank you very much for coming, and half an hour earlier than normal. We'll get home. Right, thank you.
Thank you.